guys, Teresa here. Welcome back to my channel, Lost My Thread. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can incorporate shirring into your garments, including my top 5 tips for success. Shirring was very trendy last spring and summer. There was a lot of shirred bodices just across the whole of the bodice or just in a back panel for a bit of shaping so you can pull it on and off without needing extra darts or extra zippers. There was shirring going on in just the wrist to add like a nice balloon sleeve effect onto tops and dresses. And I don't think that shirring has gone anywhere this year. I think it is going to be coming right back into the spring and summer, and I want to show you how to do it. The way you make these gathers is by putting an elastic thread in the bobbin and just using normal polyester thread on the top. So you can get black and white quite easily. I'm sure you can get other colors, but these are pretty readily available. And there is quite a lot of elastic in there, so it's very stretchy. And when that goes into the bobbin, it pulls all that fabric together and creates that beautiful gather. You need to wind the shirring elastic by hand onto the bobbin, not on your machine, and you need to make sure that you're giving just enough tension to allow it to sit flat against the previous level that it's wrapping around. You don't want to be pulling it too tight, or else that's going to affect how it's going into the machine. So just enough so that it's sitting flat. The number of bobbins you're going to need is going to vary a little bit, but just to give you a bit of a guide, I ended up getting about 6 rows, 55-inch wide fabric out of one bobbin. And when I made a full bodice, I ended up using 8 of these to get a 11-inch bodice. So that equated to about 38 rows of shirring, and I ended up using 1 and a bit of these. So I ended up having to get 2 of these spools of elastic thread. Loading the bobbin correctly with the shirring elastic in it, I think, is probably the most critical part of it and is going to make it or break it, I think, when you're doing shirring. So I'm going to show you how to load your bobbin in both a drop-in bobbin and a front-loading bobbin machine. This is my Janome 360 DC, which is a drop-in bobbin or a top-loading bobbin. So you just open up the bobbin case like you normally would, and then I've got my bobbin of shirring elastic. I know that on this machine that the bobbin thread needs to go through this gap, around, and then up again, and so I just need to do the same thing with my shirring elastic. So we just drop it in as normal. I find it helpful to pull this a bit taut, which then helps it to go around and then up and through. And then you would just pull that bobbin thread through like normal by putting the needle down and up again. You're good to go. And this is my Singer 8280, which is a front-loading bobbin. So you're going to do it again very much in the way you normally would do. So I've got my shirring elastic, I've got the tail going down to the left like you always would do, like a P for perfect. You pop it inside, and then you just want to make sure that you're pulling this around in this little gap here and up and through. So you load the bobbin as normal. Put the needle down and up again. And you're ready to go. And now the basics of how to shirr. Once you've got it loaded in, you are going to want to look at your stitch length. You generally will want to go for a longer stitch length, usually 3.5 or 4 work the best. You're going for a normal straight stitch. I have never had to adjust the tension on my bobbin or the tension on my machine, and I have used new machines and multiple vintage machines, but I can only talk from my own experience. I would say start with not doing any additional tension adjustments, just a longer stitch length of 3.5 or 4, and hopefully it will work on your machine too. It's always a good idea to finish the top of the bodice or the skirt that you're making before you start the shirring, just because it's a lot harder to do that afterwards. When you're doing your first row, you need to make sure that you backstitch. It's really important with shirring elastic because otherwise the elastic might just pull through while you're wearing it. So make sure you do backstitch 2 or 3 times before you start a row. You can backstitch the beginning and end of each row, but I prefer to actually go into my seam allowance. I've got a chalk line here that shows me where my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance is. After my first row, I'm going to carry on into that seam allowance, keep my needle down and pivot and sew down a few stitches along the seam allowance. Then I pivot back again, and then I can do my second row of top stitching without having to cut or back stitch the beginning and end. To me, that just feels more secure than having the back stitches because I know one continuous piece is not about to hang out of place. I prefer to line the edge of my foot up with the previous row, which is how I know the width of the rows. But if you want, you can always draw some lines on there with some chalk and follow along. But for me, this is accurate enough. And now my top 5 tips for shirring success. Tip number 1, always test. This is just good for sewing in general, but always do a test with your shirring, ideally on a scrap of the fabric that you're going to be using to be as accurate as possible. Tip number 2, if you are making a strapless dress or a skirt that's not going to have anything holding it up apart from the shirring elastic, I highly recommend putting in an elastic channel so you can thread through some elastic that will hold it up a little bit more securely. So that would be like a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, or even 3/4 inch elastic, and that's just going to make sure that it's going to stay in place. The shirring elastic, it stretches, but doesn't necessarily stay up throughout the day. Tip number 3. In an ideal world, you want to make sure you're checking your bobbin so that your bobbin thread doesn't run out midway through a row. If it happens, because it's going to happen, just make sure that you stitch over the previous row of stitches for a good 1 or 2 inches to make sure that you're giving that good security so it's not going to pull out as you're wearing it. Tip number 4, I would always use French seams when I'm doing anything with shirring, just because that's going to enclose that shirring elastic 2 times, so it's less likely to pull out over time. And tip number 5, don't be a perfectionist. It doesn't need to be perfect. Even if the shirring elastic looks wibbly wobbly on the back, when it's all gathered together on the front, it's gonna look beautiful. So just go for it. If you have any of your own tips from experience of shirring over time, please leave them in the comments down below. Let me know if you enjoyed my video by giving me a like or telling me what you liked about it in the comments. If you enjoyed my video, please do think about subscribing to see more of my videos in the future, and I'll see you all soon. Bye!